Hello everyone, I hope you're doing uncommonly well today, and I am so happy that you came and honored that you chose Homemaking Radio to listen while you walk or while you work. And so before you go about your day, please click the link in the description box and go to the post on which I have embedded this video and see what else I have put there. And the first thing that I like to encourage you all to do is go and get yourself fixed up and dressed, unless you're not feeling well and you just want to sit and listen, and get ready for your day and to work in your wonderful home. And before I go, I'll share my teacup with you. This one has a lot of that nice dark green in it, and it is called... It doesn't have a name, but it's one of these new editions from Stitch called Gracie Bone China, which you get at the reject stores in the Ross and Home Goods, TJ Maxx, Marshalls, that sort of thing. And it's dishwasher safe. So I wanted to share that with you today. And today I'm sitting in front of the tiniest little room in the manse. And it is just big enough to fit this twin-size, single-size bed from wall to wall, and it's not coming out unless we stand it up, I think. And it was a dilemma at first to know what to do with this room because it was so small, and finally settled on making it a bedroom because that was what was the most needed. And if it were not a bedroom, it would be a little maybe writing room, library, something like that. And it still has a little desk here that can be used, and I've squashed quite a bit in here. And this was the room that I had turned into an ocean room with ocean sounds, and got out all my seashells for, and all my ocean type decor. And so today I want to start out by really encouraging you to take care of your appearance first, because you can, in a home where you are not regulated, where you have to regulate yourself, the first thing that I think helps so much, if you're wondering what to do first, is to go and take care of your appearance, because that gives you a starting point and also makes you feel more serious about the task ahead. And we know that if you were at work, someone would tell you what uniform that you had to wear, but now that you're home, you can choose what you want. It can be quite daunting at first, not having other people tell you what to do or tell you what's expected of you, because you have to start to learn to monitor your own actions at home, figuring out what needs to be done first. And but it can be done, and for too long I think people expect other people to regulate them. And so that's the one unique thing about the homemaker, is that she regulates herself. And so hopefully this will help. We always have wonderful helping things you can get on the web. You can see videos on how to clean. So I don't usually tell you how to cook or clean, because you can find a lot of information on that. This is just something to listen to while you work, as if it were the good old-fashioned days of the radio back in the 1950s. I grew up in the 1950s and observed some of the homemakers and the homes of the 1950s, and why it is so attractive to go back into the 1950s, where some of the elements, some of the good things that we adopt from that era about the home and homemaking. And I could go into length about it sometime, about what was different about it and what we liked about it, and why so many people enjoy going back into a period of time and decorating their homes that way or dressing that way, and why that they choose this more slow life and how much more comforting it is to them. Now today I would like to also talk to you a little bit about getting along with other people. So this might be quite lengthy. And the reason is, as we come out of this crazy political period, more people are going to be socializing and getting together, and it's almost as if we have to learn all over again how to act and how to speak. One of the advantages of it, of being a little more cooped up, is that we develop a sense of manners between ourselves in our own homes and our own families, and we realize that that is the ideal unit, the family unit, and we develop our own humor and our own games and our own likes and dislikes, and get to know each other better. And that was the one thing that I liked about homeschooling. So for many of us who homeschooled and who've always been homemakers and who were raised by homemakers, it wasn't a big deal to be, quote, shut down, because we've always been home and as our base. But of course we could go when we wanted to, go down to the shops, get some things for our dinner, and prepare our homes, and just the joy of shopping and improving things at home. That was kind of cut off from us, but we knew how to turn life at home into something that was worthwhile. And so for us, it wasn't as dramatic or traumatic. And so I wanted to share some things with you about homemaking and homeschooling that help you get you through your day. But I want to read something to you here, and I'm not sure how long I'll be able to speak today. And I have some ideas that probably I shouldn't even be sharing, because some of them are rather outrageous. So I want to read something to you from Romans chapter 12. A lot of people don't realize how this tells people how to live. It's the best psychology in the world is Romans chapter 12, but you have to take it into consideration and look around you and see when it can be applied and when would be wise not to apply it. And a lot of people want to live by rules, and they want to, because they cannot make, they don't want to make good judgments. They don't want to learn to balance, to weigh something in the balance, and they don't want to make a judgment. So they would rather have rules to live by, and then they don't have to think. And unfortunately, people that are like that, they want to boss you too. They want to have rules to live by, and they want you to live by those rules too. And a lot of people are like that. If you remember Catherine from Anne of Green Gables, and Anne of Avonlea, and she was a school teacher in the college where Anne was teaching as well. But she was so sharp, and she was so, she wanted the remedial education, and she wanted the rules. And Anne was stuck with her because they had to work together, and she invited her back to Green Gables to spend some of the vacation time with her. And she finally had to level with her, because this Catherine was so critical. Everything she said the opposite. She contradicted everything. Nothing could be different. Nothing could change. Nothing could improve, because that's the way it was, and it's set in stone. How many times have you sat in your house listening to a couple people talk that were visiting, and they'd go on and on about how bad things were, how bad things always have been, and how bad things always will be, until you just thought you were going crazy because, yeah, you're right, it's just so bad. And, sometimes I have felt like saying, you're right, we should just dig a hole and go get in it, because nothing's going to improve. And I'm always amused at people that don't have a solution to anything. They just love to sit down and gripe and tell you how bad life is. It is, to me, it's a sorry situation, and I don't even think it's pleasing to God. Because when you look at the quickest illustration I can think of people whose minds were of a solution-oriented nature, were the spies that went into Canaan. And the ones that came out, that I believe that there were 10 spies, and only a few of them said, "Oh, yeah, we can take this land," but the others were busy telling you about the giants and telling, reporting about how bad it was, and how there wasn't any of this and there wasn't any of that, and then there were giants, and there was it would just be impossible. And so, of course, the ones that were positive, God was pleased with them, and they were allowed to go to the promised land. But this way that we act, we have to be very careful, because we get to being negative, then we think everybody else should be negative, and then we're offended when someone's cheerful. And have you ever ran into people like that? Well, I wanted to tell you about someone you might be familiar with, and that was, if you remember, Anne of Green Gables. She became a teacher at a college, and she met another fellow teacher whose name was Catherine, and Catherine was strict and wanted to follow rules. And Anne was more into sizing up the situation and applying a loving principle to it in order to solve it. But Catherine was into rules, and she was negative. And anything you said to Catherine, she would say the opposite. She would contradict, and it was just about impossible to work with her, and the students didn't respond well to her either. And so Anne invited her to Green Gables for a holiday when school was out, and showed her some of the country life, and they were picking apples, and they were enjoying the freedom of doing things without a schedule and without rules. And Catherine was somewhat adjusting to this and enjoying it. And then every now and then this inner impossibility thinking would take over, and Catherine would say something. And Anne finally got frustrated with her, and she said, "Catherine, you're just all prickles." And I think a lot of people just don't realize that they are like that. And as we socialize more now, since the world is, quote, opening up for many people that have felt like they are more restricted, we need to keep in mind some of these things. And so what I wanted to read to you was this way to get along with people. But as I said, we need to always keep it in perspective of when it would be wise to use it. And also, don't turn every single principle into a hard, fast rule, because rules, people tend to resist people who are bossy, who are ruling over them. You look at these people that are constantly talking back, or contradicting, or being very bossy or know-it-all. People tend to resist them or avoid them. And so this is what Anne was trying to tell Catherine, was that, you push people away with this personality, and we do have some control over what we do. And so as a preacher's wife of 50 years, I have had every type come into my home over the years, and especially if I have a ladies' fellowship regularly, there'll always be one woman there that will be pushy, that will be contradicting, that will always be depressing other people and telling people how bad life is. And I find it very contradictory that Christians would talk like that when they have such a great God, and we read about all the miracles and all the things that God did for his people and to bring them to Christ, and then start telling people how bad life is. But life is actually what you make it, and especially if you follow these dear principles, you're going to find things much different. And when you run across a negative person who wants to run your life or contradict everything you say or do, and doesn't want to have a pleasant conversation with you, you have to realize they're living in darkness. And so I wanted to read this to you, chapter 12, and it's all about getting along with your fellow man, but you have to take it in consideration according to when you can apply it. I love this. It's starting with verse 9. Let love be genuine. Abhor what is evil. Hold fast to what is good. I don't know if you know what the word abhor means. It's like pushing something away, when you abhor it, you just want to get away from it. So, abhor what is evil. Hold fast to what is good. That's like, if you've ever had a baby, they sometimes go through a stage where something is bothering them and they'll cling really, really tight. They'll cling so tight they'll put their fingernails into your flesh. They're holding fast to you for some reason, for security. Hold fast to what is good. Love one another with brotherly affection. Outdo one another in showing honor. That's interesting, isn't it? That's the way ladies should behave with one another, as they outdo one another. We're always trying to show our honor to one another by doing something a little better. Do not be slothful in zeal. Be fervent in spirit and serve the Lord. Rejoice in hope. Oh my, that would be the guide to every conversation, wouldn't it? Rejoice in hope. Because, they can really bring those conversations down, down, down. And they tell you how bad everything is that you do. And try to correct everything that you do. Be patient in tribulation. You see, this is what has happened to us over the last few years, is that when tribulation comes, when there's some kind of problem going on and the government starts acting up and putting pressure on people and even persecuting people, there are some people that lose their patience and start acting in a way that you've never seen them act before. They panic, they break off friendships, they draw lines, they will not fellowship you, they will not talk to you. They hate you because when things are going good, they'll be your friend and they're kind. But then all of a sudden, when things are going bad and they see that you're not going to cooperate with the powers that be, or that you're not going along with the narrative, then they get angry. And so they're not patient in tribulation. Patient in tribulation, be constant in prayer. Yes. You being constant in prayer, you don't have to go to a prayer room. You don't have to go to a special place, but you can be continually in prayer in your mind, continually communicating with God. Contribute to the needs of the saints and seek to show hospitality. Well, there's the problem we're having, is that now that many people are wanting to show hospitality, we're getting these characters coming in that don't know how to act and who make it miserable for other people. Now, I will share with you an amusing situation here that happens all the time. I live in a house that was made in the 1960s, when it was popular to build a house out of cinder block. Now, cinder block are those big blocks that have two big holes in them, so they're porous, and then it's painted over with concrete or some other kind of plasterous material, and so it's very hard to get the doors and windows to fit snugly, because it's a material that's very difficult, and it's not like a stick-built house. And I have a front door, that the wind comes through a little crack in it and whistles. Now, when we first moved here 30 years ago, I covered it with a blanket. I did all kinds of things, and then I realized it wasn't making anything cold in here. It was just making this eerie whistling sound, so I just let it go, and I got used to it. But then I had people coming over, and they wanted to fix it. And I'd say, just leave it. No one comes into this room unless I have company. We're busy in the other parts of the house, and we don't mind. And the door never flies open, and it's not cold. And it's because the door is made of a different material than the house, and it never could get quite snug enough. And so they were always bringing over some kind of sticky stuff that was padded that they were going to line it with and make it stop. And they would jam the door up. The door wouldn't shut. Or they would leave the sticky stuff on there that was supposed to kind of buffer that wind. And then when it didn't work and I wanted to take it down, there's all this gummy stuff on the door. And so every time that starts whistling, someone that's there, whether it's in a ladies' class or just someone visiting in that room, which is never used unless someone else comes, will say, "Oh, I can fix that," and then they'll show up a few days later with something to fix that sound. Well, the grandchildren thought that it was an adventurous sound. It sounded like an old movie. It sounded like a storm coming in. It has a high-pitched whistling sound. And some people would come and they were charmed by it. They thought that it sounded like a little house on the prairie, like this prairie winds coming through. And but since we weren't in there very much, except when there was company, I have forgotten about it. But there's always somebody that wants to come and tell me what to do with that door. And since the house is very old and we've tried everything, it's hard to say no, but they always know better than me what to do about it, even though it's never happened to them. And I have noticed that when you go to someone's house that's a newer home, they might have a little flaw there, but no one ever says anything about that. The company's generally pretty polite with people whose houses look a little bit more expensive, and but when you come to the manse, it's like they want to repair everything for me, and some of them do a pretty good job, but you always get a know-it-all in your house. And there are ways that we all, as a homemaker, we all do things a certain way because it suits us, because that's the way it works the best for us. So I'm always really cautious not to tell people how to run things in their homes, where to keep things, how to fix their door, unless they ask. And nowadays you don't really have to. You can go online and you can find out how to do it if you want to. And some people just like it that way. And so anyway, I just wanted to talk to you about the know-it-all today, because they can, as we're getting more social, and these states are opening up and people are just going to and fro as they wish, it's almost like we have to learn our manners over again. And first of all, a person who is tied into rules tends to be more critical and more bossy. If they want to follow rules and they think other people ought to follow rules instead of principles, then they tend to be more bossy. And you will find that the bossy people are aggravating other people too. It's not just you. And that they also have problems in their own lives, and if they're aggravating you, other people are getting pretty aggravated with them, and one day they're going to aggravate the wrong person, the person that doesn't have anything to lose, and is going to tell them off pretty quickly. But with Anne of Green Gables and Catherine, who came to see her at Green Gables, because they had been teaching in a college, a girls' college, a private school, eventually Anne got tired of Catherine not relaxing and talking back and contradicting and telling the negative side of everything, that Anne finally said something like, Catherine, you are all prickles. And that's why people avoid you, something like that. So there's the direct way to handle it, if you dare. Now, if you're in a position where you have people around that you cannot do that with because you're stuck with them as far as relatives, or maybe you're a preacher's wife and you cannot afford to offend anybody, you can always wait and see if somebody else will do it, because that's usually what happens. If you wait long enough, they're going to aggravate somebody else, and somebody else isn't going to put up with it. So you can do that. And then the other thing is to exaggerate. Now, I have seen this done where someone was very critical, and finally one of the ladies said, we know that you're better and smarter than the rest of us. And so it just made this lady stop, with her criticism. And so you can go to the blunt way, but you can always exaggerate too. the other way to exaggerate would be, for example, when I was explaining about the door. You're right. You could tape it all up, and then we could just use the back door. Because what was happening with this tape, they were bringing this insulated tape, this thick tape, and taping, but they didn't realize that the door wasn't, we couldn't get in and out very easily with it, and it was not working very well. They were actually taping the door shut, and you could have the direct, blunt way, or you could exaggerate and say that they know better. And you could also be very humorous about it. Some people are quite good at that. It seems like as you get older, it gets a little better. But it'd be nice to teach your children to be witty and funny with these kind of people and put them in their place before they go too far. And then there is the saying, "You may be right." Now, "you may be right" is a hard thing to say when these people are so pushy or they're wrong, but it never says you are right. It says you may be right, and that puts everything at ease. You may be right, because when you start agreeing with someone, they can't argue. You just say, "Oh, you may be right," and just leave it at that. But sometimes they'll want you to get up and change something or do something right away. So you'll say, "Well, if you want to, you can. I don't want to, but if you want to, you can." And so then their bossing doesn't get anywhere. And then the other thing is be like Mr. Bennett in Pride and Prejudice, when Mr. Collins was going on in such an irritating way. He was that silly minister in Pride and Prejudice, and so he was talking about how he had all these neat sayings, and he knew just what to say to what, and he had it in a little notebook, and he referred to this notebook so he knew what kind of polite things to say. And so Mr. Bennett asked him questions like, how do you arrive at all these brilliant things, and do you study for them, or do they just come into your mind? Or so he got him in a conversation about it all, and I could see Mr. Bennett didn't like it or believe in it at all, but you could approach it humorously. And what's really sad is in this day and age, we don't have the comedies that we used to have, and I'll refer to the Carol Burnett show and the Andy Griffith show, because they always had a silly person on there that was doing something in such an exaggerated way. Like Carol Burnett had the bossy mama show, and mama was real negative, and she ran her daughters down, and she bossed everybody around, and we all laughed at that, but it made us more aware that we didn't want to be like that, and how it looked. We saw how it looked when they exaggerated it in a play. And so I think of Elijah, who mocked King Ahab and his gods. Where are your gods? Why aren't they doing anything for you? And are they sleeping? And so some people overcome it with humor. If you possibly could learn to do that with grace. And I've noticed that some people, they just naturally know how to do this and how to handle this. Other people feel intimidated when these bossy people come around. Now, the ones that live by rules are the ones that are the worst, and they want other people to live by rules too. And they don't have a give and take attitude towards life. Everybody has to do what they want done the way they want it done. And so what you need to do with people who like to live by rules is, well, now, how do you handle people that don't follow these rules? Just ask them this question: how do you handle it if someone doesn't agree with you? If the lady is insisting that this door be fixed this certain way and it won't work, you say, now how do you handle it with other people when they don't want their door fixed? How do you handle other people who don't agree with how you're doing it? I mean, does that upset you, or what do you do? Do you push harder and just kind of interrogate them as to their inner thoughts about their rules. And people who live by rules also want to inconvenience others so that they may live by their rules. And so they may live a perfect life. They have to inconvenience other people with rules so that they can go through life seeing, hearing, and doing things that are nice for them. And that is a very hard thing to explain. But some people get up in the morning and they want to organize everybody else and let them have a perfect life. So it's hard to deal with some of these bossy people, and it reminds me of these people that can't give or take in life. They can't. Life has to go smoothly for them, and if it doesn't, then I'm trying to figure out why I've got so much light here. The light's coming in. They want to boss everyone, and the Bible talks about these people. We sometimes think the Bible's only full of good things, and we're only going to read about the good heroes and that sort of thing, but we forget sometimes what was done to these negative ones, and these ones that gave a bad report. God was never thrilled with them, and you'll find these people that always have a bad report, or talking back and contradicting everything. They're going to be having health problems. They're going to have mental problems. They're going to have problems with their relationships at home and with other people. And the people don't like to be regulated. They don't like to be pushed around. They don't like to be, if only people could understand that, especially the adults. But it reminds me of, for some reason, the story, a movie that I saw years ago that very hard to get a hold of. I tried to watch it, tried to find it years ago, but it was called Sleepers. And remember I told you that when this war came along, this government, that wanted to shut us all down and make us cover our faces and make us stand in lines and walk on a line and stand on an X and all that. It reminded me of this Sleepers, because all the merchants all of a sudden woke up and started bossing people around, people you got along with a long time ago. And they started bossing people around and all of a sudden became like policemen. And it was like the Sleepers had been woken up now that the regime was in power. And so these Sleepers were two men from the Soviet Union, and they had been sent to England, and one of them went to live in the country, got married, had children, and had a lovely country home, and the other one stayed in the city. And they had these radios that where the Soviets would give them instructions as how to infiltrate this society and what to do, but they got distracted with all the freedom that they had and started living a normal life, and they got jobs, and they enjoyed their picnics and their trips, and totally forgot about the job that they were sent to do, because this Cold War was apparently over. But then one day, one of them heard noises on that radio up in the attic, and he panicked, and he went up there and found out that the Soviets were activating all their sleepers, and that people that had gone to other countries and kind of gone to sleep, so to speak, on the job, and started getting interested in other things and had not gone back. And so these two men were not happy about being activated. They did not want to go back to work. And they wanted to continue in the life that they had. So they took the radio down to the river and threw it in, and then danced a Russian dance alongside the Thames, something like that. And it reminded, when this all started and people started getting more bossy, it reminded me of that. It's like, oh, the Sleepers, they've all woken up, and the bosses are all coming around and bossing us. So as we get more free, and especially women in the home, we're free. We get to do what we want to do. We get to stop and have tea when we want to do. If we get discouraged, we can read a book or go take a bath or, revive ourselves. We can go and go get some groceries, and we're free. Nobody is restricting us, and we're not on a 9 to 5 thing, and there's no boss at a place of work that's regulating us. We can take our vacations when we want to. We can take our meals when we want to. We can have company if we want to. We can have a hobby. We can write a book. We can learn to play music, and we can have a singing group, and we're free, But when the government went crazy in all these countries, all of a sudden these sleepers come out, and mostly I found them in the merchant class. The merchants and the employees of the merchants became very bossy. And also, even in the churches, there were some people that thought that the churches should obey all kinds of government rules, when a church is not really a place, it's a people. It's a group of people. It's a body of people. And I thought to myself, all the sleepers, they've been woken. So ladies, I hope that you are getting something out of this for maybe some of the things that you're encountering. Now, also, I have mentioned Anne of Green Gables, but there were other authors that, see, from lack of experience with people. Now, I've been a preacher's wife for 50 years, and yes, I've run into this kind of thing where I learned the hard way that I couldn't tell somebody off. A lot of times when things happened and someone was extremely rude, someone else would say, why didn't you just, tell them to get away from you? Why didn't you just tell them to be quiet? Because in a social situation that I'm in, I can't afford to do that. Now, they could, because they had nothing to lose. So we do have this problem, and if you have a neighbor and the neighbor is a problem, you can't tell them off because you're going to have to live next to them, or maybe you have someone in your household and you're going to have to live with them, and they're extremely critical, and they're running you down, and they're pushing you, and you're going to have to figure out how to deal with it humorously. And so you could always say, well, I would do what you say, but you're so much better at it than I am. I'll just let you do that. Except I'm going to draw the line at my door. I don't want anybody to mess with my door. And there are some people that like it. Now, I want to read a little bit more from Romans 12, because it tells how to get along with people. And I don't think there's anything wrong with getting along with them with humor, too. Bless those who persecute you. Bless those and do not curse them. Rejoice with those who rejoice. Weep with those who weep. Live in harmony with one another. Do not be haughty, but associate with the lowly. Never be wise in your own sight. Repay no one evil for evil, but give thought to do what is honorable in the sight of all. If possible, as far as it depends on you, live in peace with all people. Okay, so this is what we're trying to do. We're trying to live in peace with people, and we don't want to insult them, but at the same time, we can't let people walk all over us, because that would be wrong too. And it's a bad example to our children to let people come in our house and start bossing us, or bossing our children. This is really bad, and so what you have to do with some of these people when they get like that is say, oh, well, I'll take care of things in my house and you take care of things in your house. I would never go to your house and tell you how to prepare this food, or how to take care of this or do that. I would never do that. I would just go there and I would be interested in what you were doing, but I would never go over there and try to boss you. And you could shame them a little bit. And but you have to realize these people they're living in a dark world, because they cannot adjust to life having its ups and downs and its backs and forths. And so the other thing I want to emphasize, and this is really important, is to be quiet. because there are people that would never get as far as they do if you would not reveal so much about yourself, about your life. People will compliment you, say, "That's really a nice tea you put on for me." Just say thank you. But don't go on and on about, "Well, I got the recipe out of this old book and everything," because then they've got something else to grab a hold of and criticize. "Oh, I'd never use that book." Don't give them any more information. Be quiet. Try to be quiet around them. Now, sometimes they will sense that you're withholding information, and they'll say, "Is everything okay? Are you mad at me? Because I notice you're not talking much." Just say, "No, I'm fine." But you don't need to reveal so much to these people. If you give them fuel, if you give them any information, then they've got something to talk back. They've got something to object to. They have something to contradict. And so practice this when you're around certain people that rattle you, that seem to be pushing you around or contradicting everything, is to reduce the amount of information that you give them. Reduce the amount of things that you say. If they say something, give very simple answers like, "That's nice, thank you, that's interesting," and leave it at that. But don't add more information. Don't. If they compliment something in your house, don't say, "Well, the reason I have that there is because it blocks this little area here where there's an ugly part of the wall," and everything. Don't tell them stuff like that, because they will say, "Well, I would never do that. This is what I would do." Just say thank you. And if they compliment something you're wearing, don't say, "Well, this was part of my grandmother's old skirt, and I cut this piece out," and then they would say, "Well, I'd never bothered to do something like that." Just say thank you. Just learn to say thank you. That's interesting. And the other thing was, if they say, "How are you?" just say, "I'm fine." You don't have to add all that stuff. Now, in conversation skills, we learn to add a little bit more so that the conversation isn't so stilted. In normal relationships, with normal people, you can't just say yes or no, because then the conversation doesn't go anywhere and it's not very interesting. You have to add things like "and I" or "and we," but you don't do that to these types of people who are pushy, objectionable, bossy, contradicting. So you have to keep your answers really simple with them. You'll notice this with little children. They'll go through an argumentative stage. So you have to keep your answers very, very short, like yes or no, and keep them limited so that they don't have an opportunity to argue about every little thing. And we have to get, as far as possible, the Bible says, be harmonious with people, but you're going to have to control some situations so that you can be harmonious, because it's also wrong to let these people be so negative that they cast gloom all over your home and you and your children, and are a negative influence. And we have choices. We don't have to listen to that. We don't have to be stuck with that. Yes, we might have a neighbor, but we can limit how they affect us. We're not subject to them. We don't recognize them as authorities over us. And so with some of these types, you have to just say yes and no and thank you, and oh, that's interesting, but you don't have to add more stuff, because they will grab a hold of it and run. And some people don't have their own ideas. They don't have anything to talk about. They just wait till other people say things, and then they run it down, and then they say things that are objectionable, because they are used to arguing. And if you got into their homes and they didn't know you were there, you might see how they operate, that they constantly argue. That is their way they live. They argue all the time. So when they get around you and you don't want to live like that. You don't want to talk like that. They feel awkward if you're not talking back to them. They feel awkward if they're not arguing. They have done it for so long that they don't feel well unless they do it. Now, I wanted to also, while I'm talking about the scripture here, is also that there were many times in which Christ exaggerated, and so did the prophets exaggerated to emphasize a point. Like I mentioned, Elijah said, what's the matter? Can't your God hear you? And you can use humor and things that have that exaggeration in it. When someone becomes extremely critical, just as I said, sometimes if two people are sitting in my living room and then they're griping about life, I can say things like, well, maybe we should just burn the place down, something like that, to exaggerate the fact that they're going nowhere with their complaints. And so I am sure that there have been a lot of clever plays, a lot of novels, a lot of books, and particularly the Jane Austen novels. Now, she was confronted with these types, these negative types, and we don't see it sometimes when we're reading the stories of the Bible or in literature or even some of the movies that we watch, that we don't notice that. But I think that Anne, particularly in Anne of Green Gables, Ellen Montgomery must have known these people, because she made Anne meet them all in her books. And from her neighbor, Rachel, who was extremely bossy, and Anne put her in her place right away, and then she was forced to apologize, of which she did so dramatically that it showed how ridiculous it was. And then she had, the woman that supported the private college with so much money, and she said, Anne said she was never one to give away a compliment because she was so dreary in her mind and so sharp-tongued, and so Anne over time grew in grace, and she learned to live with these people who really were out of place and rude in the things that they said. And so we can learn a lot from that, but it's just too bad we don't have more of the comedies going on, because comedies show the contrast, between just plain silliness and people who have stable minds. It just shows the contrast. And when we had these comedies, we didn't want to be like these people. And now we have nothing to compare with, but I believe that there was a purpose for all of that. Now, ladies, this is something else that I wanted to talk to you about, is that I had recommended, or not recommended, but read to you out of the McGuffey's Third Reader. Now, the fourth is my favorite, and it's the one that I recommend the most. But I was reading in this one, and of course I haven't read everything in these books, but we just had them as books that we would lay around and let the children open and read if they wanted to. And we used them for character studies, and we used them for spelling, we used them for reading out loud, learning to read fluently. And I came across the Eclectic Third Reader, and they changed these editions every few years, and so some of them wouldn't have had this story in them, and some of them would have taken them out. But I was shocked. Not everything from the 1800s is good. They were a rather dreary people who published some of these things. Now, there was the good side, too. There were the Christians. There were the happy people. There were the ones that looked on the bright side. They're the ones that had a good, healthy attitude towards life. But there was a story in here about a little boy whose mother had died. And so I wanted to tell you about that, because I would probably not recommend that you buy this or use it for your children, because it is very, very dreary, and the they had a totally different attitude about death, and it was more in your face. It wasn't spoken of in a very healthy light. And so I don't even want to read the story to you, but it's in there if you've got the third reader. And it's very, very, very sad. And I would not want anyone in a public or private school to make a child read this story about a boy whose mother had passed away at such a young age, because it would be like primary reading. And the other thing that I wanted to warn you about is not all books, as a homeschooler, you pick what you want. You could even write your own. You don't have to depend on these books. Now, this was the American Girl's Handybook and the American Boy's Handybook that were written in the 1800s, and they were full of these delightful crafts and projects you could do. How to make your own. The girls' one was how to make your own broom, how to make a fan, how to make a doll, how to make a curtain, and how to decorate your own room, how to make... here's how to make those telephones, where you would take a can and put it on a string and put it up near a wall, and how to make a terrarium, how to arrange flowers, how to present a banquet, how to... there were so many, and they were each per season. Activities, how to go... there was one here on how to go for a walk, and I had read that to you. And then the American Boys Handybook were how to make a tent. And the girls had it too, how to make a tent. Just activities for every season. And then summer was how to make a tent and how to do things outdoors. And the boys' things was how to make a raft and how to make an air balloon and how to make a hammock. And of course it was for the girls too. But we went straight to the activities and enjoyed them a lot. But the other day I was thinking I wanted to know what else was in here and whether it would be worth reading the introduction. And I found a foreword in each of these books. And they were written by somebody from the 1980s. And of course they were written with the modernist viewpoint. So what they did was they wrote 20 pages in the beginning of these books telling how bad off the Victorian boys and girls were. They couldn't do anything, and that's why they went for walks, because they didn't really have much. They didn't have gymnasiums in those days, so they had to go for walks instead, and just how bad everything was. And that's why. And the girls didn't have anywhere to go, and the boys, they didn't have any social life and everything, so they just contented themselves with making kites and swings and fire pits and things like that. And the whole introduction was so negative and actually quite carnal that I wouldn't even read it to you. So if you do get these books, I am going to just take my X-Acto knife and cut out the 20 pages because it was so bad. But if you go to Google Books and they have a copy of the actual original, you can have it copied and pay for it and have it sent to you without all this modern publishers' comments on here. It's too bad they feel they have to have a commentary on it when they weren't even there. They didn't even live that life. And it was so negative that it shocked me, actually. I was going to throw the whole book away, and then I was told, well, that's just this person's opinion that was inserted from the 1980s. The 1980s was pretty, they felt pretty free with their opinions, didn't they? So I wanted to warn you about those three things. All these books have flaws in them. They don't always, just because it's, people recommend them for homeschool doesn't mean you use every lesson in them. You have to pick and choose what you want. And if you had the time, you could just pick out what you wanted, photocopy them, and start your own notebook for your children or for yourself of the things that you liked in every book. And just because I know ladies that don't collect cookbooks, what they do is they'll find the recipe that they like. Sometimes a cookbook only has 1 or 2 recipes in it that you like, so they'll photocopy them and put them in a big binder with the rings in it, and keep only what they want, so they don't have to collect all these cookbooks. Well, it's the same with homeschool stuff too. If you didn't like everything that was in the book, or you were offended by some of it, and not all of it is good. I have even gotten some homeschool material that was published by religious groups that had 1 or 2 lessons that were just excellent, but the rest of them weren't very biblically sound, I didn't think. So what I would do is just take the lessons out and put them in another book. So ladies, I hope that this has been somewhat amusing to you. I realize I didn't say much about homemaking, and a lot of people have asked me, why don't you ever talk about marriage and getting along in marriage? Well, the reason I don't is that I never liked the marriage books, because everybody is different, and every marriage is different, and not everybody's husband is the same as everybody else's husband, and you can't regulate everybody. And everybody, I think, learns to get along according to what their character permits. And if we will abide by these character principles found in 1 Corinthians 13, then there's your answer to your marriage. And can you be patient, and can you be kind? And a lot of the problems that I mentioned before that marriages would have been had with a friend, if they treated a friend like that, or if they treated their grandmother like that, or their aunt or their uncle or their cousin like that, would still have the same problems. So I concluded that a lot of things that people call marriage problems are not marriage problems, they're character problems, and can be solved by correcting the character. And you can find many references to that, and I have quoted some of them: Galatians 5:22 and 23, and Philippians 4:8, 1 Corinthians 13, 1 Peter 5, and many other where there are lists of character qualities. And so we can get into more of that later, and it's also up to the wife in many respects to keep track of her own character, and to train her children in character too, so that they will be good husbands and wives. And for a great deal of the time, the woman has a lot of influence on her sons, and she can train her sons to be good husbands, and to be kind and loving, and to be faithful, and not to play mind games with people, because this can also affect marriages. So, and I have seen so many sad situations where if the character had been, instead of talking about the other person in the marriage, would talk about your own person, the person's character, it would have helped a lot more. So ladies, I hope that you will leave a comment, and I wanted to thank you all for coming, and I hope you have a wonderful day, and you go for your walk, and observe and enjoy life. And so I will see you next time. God bless you. Bye.